Hi, I'm Cynthia Webb. I am one of the special education area supervisors. I support the BCC, Blair, Einstein, and Northwood clusters. Um, I am a homegrown girl. I started in Montgomery County Public Schools at the age of 5 and went to William Tyler Page Elementary School, Benjamin Banneker Middle School, or junior high school at that time, and I'm a graduate of Paint Branch High School. And I won't tell you how long I've been working in Montgomery County, but it's my entire career. Chris, you want to go next?
Good evening. My name is Chris Erickson, even though there's a different name on my Zoom. It is me, in fact. I am also a lifer in Montgomery County. This is my 43rd year in special education in Montgomery County. I'm a special education supervisor, primarily supporting students with autism, but open to supporting anybody. So it is nice to see you all this evening.
I'll just take a moment and introduce myself, even though she didn't ask me to. My name is Kia Murphy. I'm the director for the Department of Special Education Services. And Cynthia and I grew up in each other's backyard, Tamarack Triangle. So I am Cannon Road, White Oak Junior High, and I am a Blue Devil, Springbrook. So
We don't hold that against her.
oh, I hope you enjoyed the evening.
Okay, can you see the screen? I think we can take it away.
Yes, I do want to start by making a pre-apology for my internet. I think I've frozen us a couple times tonight. I'm going to keep my hands off of everything, but if I freeze, I know that Dr. Webb and my colleagues will pick right up where I am. So tonight's session talks about how students are identified for special education services. Our speaker, Ms. Jackson, referred earlier to that moment when you know that something is awry or you know that you want to know more. And for Teresa, as a fellow grandmother, I heard you saying that's where you might be. And so we hope we'll give you information this evening to help you on that journey.
Thank you.
So special education is an outgrowth of a federal law, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which is our federal law that really is about special education services being provided to students who are eligible, students who have disabilities throughout the nation. The law provides for specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of a student. But it also provides for supports and regulations and rights for parents and caregivers and advocates. We talked a little bit in our earlier presentation about placement into a program, but we're working hard to talk with families to understand that special education is or are services that are based on specific needs. They may be provided in a place, but
What Chris is saying is that they may be provided somewhere other than in your neighborhood school, but not necessarily so. And any special education service that is provided free to the family.
thank you, Dr. Webb. Did I just freeze?
You did freeze. If I can add one thing, when we talk about special education law, it's important to understand that it comes out of civil rights law. So the year I believe was 1974 when the first special education regulations came out.
So the special education process starts with what we call the child find referral. There is in fact an office in Montgomery County, in every county, referred to as the child find office, that screens students who are younger than 5. But a student may participate and their family in a child find referral at any point in their educational career as we're considering whether or not a student has a disability. If there's reason to suspect a disability, an IEP team or a screening team has 60 days to conduct assessments that we would agree on as a group and hold the evaluation meeting and determine if a student is in fact eligible for services. If we find a student eligible, the team has 30 days to hold the initial IEP meeting. The team that we'll talk about more implements the IEP and comes back within a year to review progress at what we call an annual review. But we did talk earlier in our discussion about quarterly progress. So it shouldn't take 1 year for you to understand how your student is doing in school and whether or not the IEP is really meeting their needs. You should hear quarterly progress and more, and we can talk about that as we move forward. Our speaker also talked a little bit about pre-referral interventions, and IDEA talks a lot about that. Before we move to providing an IEP for your child, we as a school system should have identified strategies that and implemented them that can help your child well before we get to the point of talking about if he or she needs an IEP. You'll hear some reference to MTSS or EMT. These are strategies and processes that should be put in place to look at your child's needs and support them prior to an IEP. Multi-tiered systems of support, the educational management team are strategies and a process that you may hear about for your child before you come to a meeting and talk about whether or not he or she has a disability that is impacting their education. Please know, though, that at any time, a parent can request a child find meeting. So remember that while we talk about strategies prior to creating an IEP for a child, you as a parent can bring forth that request at any point in the process. When you ask for a child find meeting, we have to make every effort to schedule it within 30 days of getting the first referral for evaluation. So anybody, a parent, a school member, who works with a child can make a referral for a child find meeting. Again, you can request as a parent or guardian a child find meeting at any time, or if you're supporting your daughter or your grandchildren, you can urge them to request that. MCPS will again attempt to schedule that meeting within 30 days of first getting a referral.
So when we think about what we mean by a child find meeting, it is the obligation of the school district to identify and locate and evaluate children with disabilities who live within Montgomery County, anywhere from their birth through age 21. Once we have a child find request, the parent is given at least 10 days notification ahead of when that meeting is scheduled. If for some reason that time does not work for you, the team will try to schedule with you again. One thing I do want to say is if you make a request and you understand that the school is trying to schedule that within the first 30 days, if you don't hear something from the school in terms of an official invitation letter, feel comfortable reaching out to the school and saying, hey, I sent in a request for a child find. I have not heard anything. Can somebody update me on when that meeting is going to be scheduled? Please, from the very beginning, recognize that you are your child's best advocate. Once that meeting is scheduled, you'll get documents that are going to be discussed at that meeting. Next slide, please. So the documents that are relevant to a child find meeting are a parent survey or parent questionnaire, where the team is trying to get some information from you about your child. They're going to want to know a little bit about family history. Are there other folks in the family who have struggled with school? They might want to know birth history. They're going to ask you what your concerns are. And what I think is one of the most important questions is they're going to ask you what you like best about your child and how you think the school can help your child. Someone on the team will also do an observation. There will be a report from your child's teacher or teachers, and there'll be an education history where we look at your child's progression through the years and any intervention and impact of the intervention that they have had in the past. When you're in the child find meeting and this data is shared, it is important that if you have questions, you ask questions. And if there's anything that you would like to share, please do so. It only helps the team to get a full picture of who your child is. The child find meeting will discuss the areas of strengths and needs. They will, as said in the last session, look at the response to any interventions that have been in place, and they will decide whether or not we believe that as a team, which you are a part of, that your child may have a disability requiring an IEP and specialized instruction. Teresa put in the chat, before you go to the meeting, feel free to write down some questions that you want to be sure to ask. Next slide, please. So after the team reviews all of that information, there are several possible outcomes of a child find meeting. One, you review the data, everything looks good, and there is no suspicion of an educational disability. Two, there's no suspicion of an educational disability right now, but we need to implement some things, see how they work, and come back to it. Three, there's a suspicion of an educational disability, and the team needs to collect additional information, meaning that we suspect an educational disability and we're going to move to assessment to determine what the impact is on that child's learning, how your child learns, and what your child may need. And then finally, sometimes our parents come with a private report, and there may be enough information to identify the child at that point. So when we go into a child find meeting, the important thing is for us to have an open and honest conversation about how a child is performing and what they may need. Next slide, please, Laura. Chris, do you want to take this one or do you want me to keep going?
Sure, I'll give your voice a rest.
Okay.
We talked on the previous slide about whether or not additional information was needed to determine whether or not our student has an educational disability or a disability that will impact them in their journey in school. There are some disabilities that have limited impact in school. We're talking about those that might need additional support. When we're not sure about whether or not there is an educational disability, your IEP team with you can recommend assessments in all areas that we think are impacting your child. These include those listed: cognitive, social, emotional, and behavior, academic or educational, and speech and language. These are all separate assessments, and they're designed either as standalone or together to look at what really is impacting your child in school. The cognitive assessment is what we traditionally hear referred to also as the psychological assessment, and it looks at your child's learning in depth. This is the assessment that may give you an IQ score. This is the assessment that talks about how your child actually learns in the moment, processes information, is able to access what they know, and demonstrate it in a very standardized manner. Social and emotional looks at our children's abilities really to make their way in the world in a manner that's conducive to learning and being in society. Academic really targets, and this is much more important as we look at our children who are older than preschool level, look at how our students' strengths and needs play out on very specific academic tasks. How are they able to uh, demonstrate what they know, what supports do they need to demonstrate that, and what they need to be able to engage in instruction during the day in school. And then speech and language is an often requested assessment as we look at how your child's understanding and use of speech and language are unfolding as he or she develops. These are the common assessments that we discuss. Remember, all of these are designed to look at whether or not a student has impact that will affect them in school. So we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that you have rights as a parent or guardian in this process. So here are some of the big ones. One is we must have your consent for assessment. We have to talk with you as a team about every one of the assessments we just discussed, and we need your permission to move forward to assess your child. We cannot assess your child without your explicit permission. And if we do a good job, you understand and agree with all the assessments we're recommending for your child and how they will be carried out. If your child is very young, it's a much more interactive process and one that you might participate in a limited way in terms of helping your child get to know the assessor before an assessment takes place. You are entitled to a prior written notice after any meeting. And what that is a detailed, clear listing of actions that the school system is recommending and why, anything that you have requested and our response to it. And most importantly, if as a parent, you have requested something of the school.
If you've requested something of the school and the team, the child find team, does not agree with it, then they have to tell you why as a part of the prior written notice.
Did I freeze?
You did.
I'm so sorry. Finally, you are entitled to receive and have explanation of your procedural safeguards. This is really the process that tells you how you can formally disagree with the recommendations of your child's team. There are different levels of disagreement, and we have a whole office devoted to helping you access and resolve disagreements peacefully, and you are very much entitled to that. So if at any time someone says to you, well, you have your procedural safeguards, I think it's a great practice to say, can we stop a minute? Can you tell me what that means and what it is that you're sharing with me? Often we throw the term around to families without fully explaining what it is they are and how you can access them.
And I think one of the questions that you may want to ask if there is disagreement, when you receive your procedural safeguards, that booklet can be a bit overwhelming. So you might want to ask a simple question. Who can I call to discuss my concerns? And that way you can be given information that is useful to you and that you can act upon so that you can receive some support on how to exercise your disagreement, where your disagreement really rests, and how to rectify that. Kia just put in the chat the link to your procedural safeguards, but never be apprehensive about reaching out. We are there to provide support. Next slide, Laura. So once the child find meeting decides that they suspect a disability and you have given your consent for assessments, those assessments need to take place and the team needs to reconvene to share the results within 60 days. And that is 60 calendar days. Assessments are going to be reviewed with you, and you are going to have a copy, a hard copy or an electronic copy of those assessments at least 5 days before the meeting. Once that meeting is held and the team discusses those assessments, they're going to determine whether or not your child is eligible for special education services, meaning that the team is determining whether or not your child needs an IEP that leads to specialized instruction. So if a team decides that a child is eligible for specialized instruction, they may be eligible in one of the many codes that can be there, and the list is on the screen. A child need not have but one of these codes to get specialized instruction. It is, however, important that when we look at a primary disability code or a multiple code, that we are doing the best to describe what the child needs. And if we can just go back to the previous slide, I want to make sure that we give people time to look through the list. Next slide, please. So we have, as a team, determined that a child is eligible for special education. We've identified the primary disability. We've talked about the pattern of strengths and needs and what the impact of that disability is on the child. The next step within the next 30 days is that the special educator is going to draft an IEP. That IEP is going to reiterate how the child is performing. It's going to get some information from you about what you would like to see for your child moving forward. It will talk about accommodations as well as supplementary aids and services. Supplementary aids and services are those things that the adults in a school will provide for your child to help them to access the curriculum. So they might be things like a word bank or sentence starters or preferential seating, regular checks for understanding, etc. The IEP will then also specify specific measurable goals and objectives that they want to work on aligned with the general ed standard over the course of the IEP. Then they will talk about what do the services really look like for your child, whether those services are going to be provided through a plug-in in the general ed classroom, whether there's going to be a pull-out support, and where those services are going to be implemented. So they're going to be provided at the school where you are now, or is the team recommending a different location and a different, more specialized set of services? Before an IEP is implemented, we must receive parental permission. So we can go through this whole process. We can identify as a team what we think is appropriate for the child to access the curriculum and make progress. You're a participant that whole time. But once the IEP is presented to you, you still have a right to say, I agree or I disagree. If you agree, progress is reported to you at least quarterly. And you have an annual review meeting at least once a year. Next slide, please. The IEP is a big document. It has a lot of pages. As the team goes through the document, ask questions. It is a working document. So it is updated at least annually, and you can ask for an IEP meeting more often than annually. Or the school team, particularly when a child is not making the expected progress, may ask you to come in for an IEP amendment meeting or periodic review. Reevaluation, similar to what you may have had in the beginning, is discussed every 3 years. Do we need more information in order to continue to program effectively for a student? Again, every time you have an IEP meeting, you should receive at least 10 days notice, official notice for that meeting, and at least 5 days ahead of the meeting, you should receive the documents that are going to be discussed. Remember, you can ask for an IEP meeting at any time. And you want to make sure that you understand the progress that your child is making on the goals and objectives. And that comes out at least quarterly. If you have questions about how that progress was determined, or if you disagree with what the teacher is saying in the progress notes about that, please advocate for your child and ask for a meeting. So these are some resources. The State Department has a guide to the special education process. It's a more simplified form. There is an MCPS, Special Education Compliance Manual, and then there is a document that will help you to support a child with disabilities at home. Are there any questions? I just want to make sure I ask before, I know it's almost 8:30, but if you have a question about anything that was presented, please feel free to come off of mute and go ahead and ask.
I have a question.
Sure, Felicia.
Are parents a part of the team? Are they?
Absolutely. You are not only a part of the team, you are a required part of the team. So when I say team, that the team includes an administrator, a general education teacher, a special education teacher. In the child find process, it's going to include a psychologist, perhaps a speech and language pathologist, and most importantly, the parent. In addition to the parents, it's important for you to know that you can bring any person who has knowledge of your child and can support you through the process. So if that is your friend, your mother, a consultant, whomever, please feel free to bring the support that you need to an IEP meeting.
Sandra?
Hello, case manager here.
Hi.
Proud MCPS teacher, but I want to put on the parents' hat just for a second.
Yes.
Should parents be afraid to write on the draft and have questions written on that draft?
Absolutely not. When you come to an IEP meeting, we give you the documents ahead of time, and you should write whatever on that draft so that you remember as a part of that IEP meeting as we go through it, where you might have questions. Really, I want parents to understand that this process is a dialogue among people who have the child's interest at heart. And unless we are all open with our questions and our considerations, we can't serve our children.
I'm going to try to add to that without crashing our meeting, but I think it helps your IEP team. The better prepared you are, the better we can interact with you and know and understand your concerns, and then we have a common knowledge. I think that's a great practice.
Many parents are fearful walking into the meeting. They walk around a table that may be predominantly white, and they're the only Black person with a Black child. Is there any type of pre-service or that could be done so parents could feel comfortable and honestly share what they see in those situations, which are quite common?
So one of the things is when you go into this process, you're absolutely correct. You go into, you may know your child's principal and your child's classroom teacher. You might not know the other folks at the table. You can certainly ask the teacher or the administrator, who's going to be at this meeting? What is their role? When you get your invitation letter, it should tell you who is going to be at the meeting. If you're not familiar with the roles that are listed there or the person who might be in that role, don't be hesitant to ask. This is about your child. Nobody knows your child like you do. You know your child's strengths, You know your child's needs. For some families, this can be an emotional process. That's okay. That's okay. We understand that this can be an emotional process. I encourage you to show up as you are. And you know what I mean, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Show up as you are, express your concern, understand that we might have some things we're going to work through, but it's about the children. It's not about the adults in the room. It's about the children. And if we can stay child focused, that's what we need to do. If we don't stay child focused and we get caught up in the adult stuff, then we're not serving our children. So if you're uncomfortable, say you're uncomfortable so that people can support you through this process.
So Dr. Webb, I put in the chat a link to our Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee that meets every month. That is a community forum that has parents, different community partners, and it's a wealth of information. Mary Beth, who you heard from a lot in the first session, she runs parent workshops that are free of charge. We often have notifications of other advocacy groups who also offer quick workshops that you can attend. Mary Beth mentioned that we have a resource fair coming up in May. And so there is a lot of really good information on that website. And it also has a link to our Family Support Center, and you can look at that information. And as we said earlier, always feel free to reach out to the special education supervisor. They can attend a meeting at your request or at the school's request, right? And so our job is to help facilitate communication. And so please. That's kind of one of my favorite things is when parents call and I get to talk to parents, right? So most of us, we were classroom teachers and we got that connection with students and families, and now we don't have that quite as much. And so I love it when parents call and just want to talk. And so please, reach out to us at any time. Are there any other questions before we give you the link to the evaluation and kind of finish up here?
So I would just like to say thank you all for being with us in this session, and please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the MCP.